Hello and welcome! My name is Matt, and as always, I'm just some guy on the internet. Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite things to do, which is write characters. We're going to look at two different techniques that you can use to quickly and easily write characters for your book, your story, your short story, your fanfic, your D&D game, whatever it is that you want to do. You can use these two methods to write characters fairly consistently. So let's get into it. First, we need to understand what a character is. Characters are just human beings. They're just, well, not always human beings. Sometimes they're monsters or aliens or whatever. But a character is its own person. They need to have their own values, their own aspirations, their own desires, their own motivating factors that kind of get them out of bed in the morning. These characters also need to have their own physical mannerisms. How do they walk? How do they talk? How do they interact with other people? How do their internal values represent themselves in external behaviors? Interesting characters are what drive your story. Without interesting characters, any plot is just a series of events that take place somewhat sequentially most of the time, and there's really never any stakes that go along with it. There's no emotional investment on behalf of the audience because there are no characters to connect with. People connect with people, and without interesting characters who are people, the audience has nothing to connect with, and so they can't connect with your story. Think of any generic action movie and how all of the characters are completely interchangeable and totally not relevant to the story at all. You could take any of them out and put anyone else in, and it wouldn't make any difference. That's a great example of bad characters or flat characters. The stories can still be entertaining. These action movies are still fun to watch because there's big explosions and really cool effects and some crazy stuff happens maybe. Maybe they drive a car into space. But the characters themselves aren't particularly interesting, and so the story doesn't resonate with an audience. The movie, in this case, or story might look visually awesome. It might have some cool things in it, but it's not going to have that emotional payoff that people really want to connect with. And that's what really makes a story memorable and meaningful. So, what is a character? Characters are just real people. Just like you and I have aspirations, we have dreams, we have fears and desires, we have things we're confident about and things that we're maybe not so confident about. Characters need these things too. We have our own sets of unique mannerisms, we have our own way that we talk, the way that we walk, the way that we do everything that we do that is unique to us and that makes us who we are. Characters need those things as well because it will help to make them who they are. Creating well-rounded and three-dimensional characters will help your story to feel full and lifelike. It will also help your writing process because if you develop characters that you know very well and that are very well-rounded, you can say, well, this character would act this way in this situation. The writing comes a lot easier at that point because you're not sitting there trying to figure out like, well, what do I need to do to have the plot move forward? What should I do to try to get this point across? You just act as the character and write down what they would do. You can take any particular specific scene and have the characters in that scene act according to how they would actually act were they real people. This also helps you to avoid creating plot convenient scenes as a way to get through something or to get an idea across, because your characters will behave as a real person would rather than what the plot needs them to do. You're writing a story that fits the characters rather than characters that fit the story. Again, your characters are what drives the story. There are literally thousands of videos and hours of conversation about creating characters. We could talk forever about creating characters. We're not going to do that. One series I found particularly helpful was by Abby Emmons. I'll link a thing here or both of them somewhere. It's just a really great series on developing characters and writing just in general. With that out of the way, it's time to talk about the two main approaches that you can use to create characters. And you're probably already using one or both or a combination of the two already. First approach is outside in. The outside-in approach is where you take a person's external mannerisms and you come up with how do they walk, how do they talk, what types of physical behaviors do they have, how do they dress themselves, and then you say what kind of person would have those characteristics. In other words, this is where you use all of the external attributes of the person and then use that information to inform the creation of their inner world. Using this method, you'd spend time figuring out their walk, their stance, their posture, how they interact with other people, and then use that information to determine their inner world, their values, their principles, those kinds of things. Using this method might look like figuring out what their high five looks like. Figuring out, do they walk around or do they strut? What types of clothing might they wear? Do they make a lot of eye contact when talking with other people, or do they kind of shy away? Do they project their voice in a big and resounding manner? Or do they speak meekly and softly? Using this method, we're not so much focused on the why question as much as we are the what. The why will come later. Instead, we're trying to get a collection of external features nailed down. And once we have that collection together, we can then look at the why. If your character struts around confidently, where does this confidence come from? If the character wears modest clothing, what are their views about themselves and other people that inform that decision? If they love upbeat and happy music and they can't stop themselves from dancing, what does that tell you about their general mood and their perspective on life? This approach is really useful if you're a very empathetic person and you're really able to look at a person and get a good feel for who they are. If you pay close attention to a person's external characteristics and you let that speak to who they are as a person, understanding that people make conscious choices about how they present themselves and how they speak, how they walk, how they act. You have to pay close attention to those things if you want this method to be effective for you. If, on the other hand, you are not good at these things like I am, and you have a hard time connecting all of these external attributes to a person's internal characteristics, don't lose hope, because there is another method that might work better for you. The second approach is the inside out method. The inside out method is essentially where you figure out or determine what a character's internal feelings are, their values, their principles, their mood, those kinds of things, and let those attributes inform their external behaviors and mannerisms. Put another way, you first figure out the character's principles, their values, their perspectives on other people, and then you figure out how exactly that would manifest for that particular character. Applying this process might look like spending time thinking about a character's thoughts, thinking about how they think about things, figuring out their feelings and why they feel that way. You could touch on ideas like themes and philosophies and worldviews in this process and let those things inform the inner world first, then determine the external world, their behaviors as a result of those internal thoughts. At the start, using this method, all we care about is the why. We don't really care that much at this point of the how does that manifest to other people. Once we figured out the why on the inside, we then look at the how on the outside. If your character is physically powerful, for example, or maybe they're extremely intelligent, how would they demonstrate those attributes to other people? If your character is afraid of expressing their true thoughts, how would that manifest? Would they avoid speaking their true mind, or maybe they would deflect with humor rather than let anyone get too close and be vulnerable? Thinking about the why these things happen will help you determine how the character is actually going to interact with other people in different circumstances. This approach is really useful if you find yourself in conversations focusing more on the what people are saying rather than how people are saying it. Or if you're writing a character for a specific purpose, say for example you have a situation that you need a certain specific character for, you can use this approach to say, well, I need this character to have these attributes, I need them to have this personality. Then you can take that personality and mold a character around it. Ultimately, both approaches are really just two sides of the same coin. You must figure out both in order for your character to be interesting and well-rounded. As the creator of this character, you must understand their actions, their thoughts, their feelings, their worldview, all these aspects about them if you want them to be fully realized and three-dimensional. If you don't, and you try to write a bunch of stuff with them anyway, all of the scenes with this character are going to come across as flat and uninteresting and end up being really just sort of dull and boring. If you have too much outside in, your character is without depth. They're very emotional and expressive, but none of their expressions really mean anything. If you have too much inside out, your character may have a wonderful internal world, but they won't actually express anything at all, and they'll just come off like a plank of wood in every single scene that you put them in. As for me, I tend to use the inside out method more just for the types of things that I find myself writing. I especially like using it with villains and with really important characters for my D&D game, which you can check out in the description below. We play every week. Come and check us out. You can see some of this writing in action. As far as writing villains, I plan on making a video about that coming out soon, so keep an eye out for that. You can hit the subscribe button if you'd like to stay informed. In the next video, I will talk more about the specific methods that I use, how I actually sit down and write a character, and maybe we'll go through one together and create a character. But I think I would like to keep this video relatively short and just explore these two major methods of approach. Anyway, I hope that you found this video about these two approaches to be helpful. Play around with both approaches, explore them both, and see which one works better for you. Or find a hybrid of the two and use that instead. Practice makes perfect, especially when it comes to writing, so practice, put your stuff out there, and listen to the critiques of other people. Again, most people who give you a critique are not saying it because they hate you. They're not saying these things because they want you to fail or they think that you're horrible. They want to see you improve, and they're offering their criticisms. So pay attention and find the good in those criticisms. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. I hate asking that because it feels really very YouTube-y, but it's the way to continue your content growing, so please do so. And comment your favorite methods for character creation so I can steal them and use them in my own writing processes. Anyway, I've been just some guy on the internet, and I'll see you in the next one.